what do you learn about human psychology in the sense of we have a friend, for some context, so we have a friend, both of his parents are physicists, and these parents never told their son about physics or engineering or anything like that.
So they wanted him to make up his own mind.
Right.
They weren't pushing him or trying to impose
And
their world on his. Yeah.
correct. And the funny thing is that the guy ended up studying physics.
Yeah, because he's around physicists. But they discussed some aspects of their work around in front of him at the dinner table, at least, didn't they?
They said that they never mentioned because they wanted
But he
him to.
knew what they did.
No, he didn't. He found out when they knew they were engineers, but he didn't know that they studied physics.
Okay.
So he found out when he came to college, and then he asked, what do you study? Physics. Like both of his parents.
Oh well, I can't tell you. That's.
But I'm asking.
I can't answer that question. Yeah.
Me neither. But I'm asking in the context of because like these families that they really try to change. Like they wanted their kids and their families to not make the same mistakes that they did.
Yeah, but they were all stuck in poverty, and these children saw having a child, both the boys and the girls, as a rite of passage, and none of them were prepared for anything through the public school system that served that poor area. The area is called Washington Highlands in Washington. It was, I don't know if it is now, it was one of the poorest sections of Washington. And that's where they sent the teachers that couldn't be fired because they had tenure. And they weren't really teaching the kids. There were a few kids who were in what would be the equivalent of advanced placement, and they were called derisively by the majority of students as brainiacs, but they were a very small number. And there were no pregnancies, no childbearing among them. They were as sexually active as the students who were doing very poorly in school. But if they became pregnant, they got an abortion. Why? Because they had a post-secondary future. They had a future after high school, whereas the other kids that I was studying knew they had no future. I think I mentioned earlier that the kids were very cynical, but they knew they were not competitive in the American job market. So, I mean, as much as a parent is fighting against his or her daughter getting pregnant, or his or her son having a child, the circumstances and the social environment they're growing up in militates against that.
Earlier this week, we were talking about how, in many ways, it's like whether or not you can do something or not. It's really whether, like, what you think of your outlook on and your perspective about life. So some of these kids, they were in the AP classes, and they really wanted to have a better future. But the other kids, perhaps, if they could have, if they had a more, optimistic future, they could have, have a better present life. How can you instill confidence and trust and having that, just being excited about the future for younger people?
I don't have an answer for you because I tried to figure that answer when I was doing the adolescent childbearing study. And I realized that you'd have to have major intervention in each household. And I didn't see that as physically possible. So the only possible avenue was to invest, not a capital investment, but invest in the education of kids growing up in poverty. But I also knew, this is why I think that's the easiest approach, or perhaps the most productive approach. But I also know that most public education in the United States is run through property taxes. And those property taxes are collected from the middle class. You will not be superintendent more than one day if you divert funds collected from the middle class into poor communities. The minute the middle class finds out about that, you're out of office.
So you're saying that used to happen? Or
no, it hasn't happened.
Okay.
It hasn't happened the way it needs to happen. Yeah. You know that most public school systems are run by property taxes in the United States. There are contributions by the federal government, but most of this running of the schools, the money that's devoted to the schools, the salaries of the teachers and the administrators come from the collection of property taxes of individual homeowners. So most of the money is collected from the middle class or even the working class. They're not going to stand for you taking their money, their tax money, and devoting it to rectifying centuries of neglect toward the poor. Just not going to happen. You, as a superintendent of schools, you just committed suicide once they find out about it.
Yeah, because it's eventually their money that's coming back to them in some way, right?
How?
Not for the poor.
If the money is directed at the poor, it's not coming back to them.
Yeah.
So a lot of for instance, the childbearing was because of the lack of a rite of passage. I see similarities to, today's society in the sense of for instance, my class of high school, we didn't have graduation, which in a way that serves as.
Where'd you go to high school?
We didn't have graduation because of COVID. So like the whole.
Oh, okay. So
the whole.
Everything was on Zoom, and you didn't have the.
Right, because of COVID, and so like.
Where was this?
In Chicago.
Chicago, okay.
But I mean, throughout the world, no one had graduations because of COVID.
Right.
So that wasn't as the rite of passage, but in general, we seem to be losing this rite of passages. So, do you think how can we create this rite of passages for people, and so people don't have to?
Only if they see they have an opportunity. What is the rite of passage for? Prepare you for the next stage of life. Well, if you don't see this, the next stage of your life is still the same dead end before the rite of passage, then why take the rite of passage? Or why not select your own? Why not select a parallel universe or a parallel reward system that says having a child early in life is an important factor and it turns you into an adult? That's how you begin to think. Because going to college or getting a good civil service job is not in the works for you. Particularly if your reading is not up to par. And these kids knew it. I mean, when I told you about Charlie Williams telling me, I don't read well enough to take the driving part of the commercial truck driver's license. That's quite an admission. So where does he look for achievement for himself, besides having babies? Or stick up banks, or dealing drugs, or sticking up drug dealers? That's a very short life.
Was there something in particular that drew you to these stories? Maybe the adolescent childbearing or Rosalie?
Well, when I came back, I was an African correspondent from 79 to 84. When I came back from Africa, I was working on the foreign desk as an assistant foreign editor. That's a boring job because you're editing other people's copy.
Right.
And at the time, 84, January 84, there were a lot of stories being written about high levels of adolescent childbearing in poor black communities. And I was reading the rationales or the reasons given by experts, quote unquote experts, about why children were having children. And they rang hollow to me. They didn't make sense to me. Remember, I grew up in Harlem.
Right.
And I wasn't poor because I had two working parents. My father worked in the post office. My mother was a registered nurse with the New York City Health Department. So we were living in Harlem because we were segregated by ethnicity. So, but I went to public school from the 1st to the 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And I went to public school with a lot of kids who were very poor. They either lived in public housing nearby or they lived in tenements, walk-up tenements, 6-story tenements. And one of the things that the experts were saying were that these girls were becoming mothers because they lived in grim, dire circumstances, and they were easily manipulable by the adolescent teenage boys that were in their community. Well, I just said, that doesn't make any sense. That sounds very sexist to me. I grew up in Harlem, and I interacted with a lot of girls who were very poor, and you weren't convincing them to do anything that they didn't want to do.
Right.
They were very tough. They were tougher than some of the boys. If you didn't treat them right, they would put. I've seen a number of these girls beat up boys, boys with equal height and equal weight. So it was an even fight, which surprised me when I first saw it. So these were tough girls. So I saw that explanation as sexist, and people who were ignorant didn't know better. When I did the adolescent childbearing study, there was 6 families involved in it. None of the mothers, adolescent mothers in those 6 families had been manipulated into having a child. They all had decided before the boyfriend that they were going to have a child and informed the boyfriend that they were going to have a child. And in a number of cases, the boyfriends tried to talk them out of it and said, we're too young to be having children. And they said, well, I've decided to have it. Sheila Matthews told her boyfriend, Mario, I've decided to have a child and I've decided you're going to be the father. And he laughed at her. But she knew that his routine was to take chances. And a number of times he took chances and she got pregnant. She knew that was going to happen.
I do want to talk about Rosalie Cunningham. In one instance that I found interesting in the whole story is a story of Alvin and Eric, I believe.
Now, Alvin is dead. He died of diabetes in 2013.
Oh.
Eric is still alive. He's retired. He was a school bus driver for handicapped children. Okay. And he's retired and moved to Rocky Mount, North Carolina. I'm still very much in touch with the family, as you can tell.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
So something that I found very interesting about the story is how peer pressure actually had a positive impact in the lives of Alvin and Eric. Okay. You mentioned at one point that I believe it was Alvin that he never went to get to the truck to get the food because the brothers thought he was being lazy when in reality he was ashamed.
He was ashamed of it. He didn't want his girlfriend and her parents. This is in the era in the 1950s where welfare poor and working poor lived together.